think Lena said we're live.
All right, so I'll just take it here and we'll get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much to our participants here today and to everybody joining us. We're going to hear some really amazing insights and firsthand account of the situation in Ukraine. I'm going to introduce myself. So I am the public relations and media manager at MedGlobal. I've only started about a month and a half ago, and I'm blown away by the programs and the heroes we have around the world, including in Ukraine. Unfortunately, today we were supposed to be joined by our Ukraine country representative in Kyiv. And because of recent massive attacks in Kyiv, her own city and other cities, and the power blackouts, she doesn't have electricity and cannot join us. But I want to start with you, Olga. You are our Ukraine programs coordinator based in Chicago. You work with Alexandra, who cannot join us today, very closely. So tell us, how is she doing? How are your relatives doing right now in Ukraine in the aftermath of these attacks? And how are these power outages impacting Ukrainian citizens?
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure being with everybody here today. Thank you to our listeners to being with us. I did speak with Alexandra earlier this morning, and unfortunately we couldn't speak for very long because she had a very poor connection, and this is a result of a massive attack that happened Monday, and also it carried on until half a day Tuesday. And even today when we spoke, she said that she saw drones and Shaheds flying around in Kyiv. The power outages are really extensive now. They last anywhere between 7 and more hours. This has a huge impact. I mean, since the beginning of full-scale invasion, Russia has been really targeting Ukrainian energy system, and this has a huge impact, negative impact on hospitals, because a lot of equipment, as we know, a lot of vital and life important equipment depends on electricity. So we're talking about ventilators, oxygen concentrators, insulin pumps, which will not be able to function properly, and that can lead to worsening of the illnesses and even death. Sorry, I took that a little bit further than just talking about Alexandra, but I really want to stress the importance and how important the risks are. It's not just the fact that there's no electricity, it's the fact that a lot of hospitals are not able to function properly. Not every hospital in Ukraine is equipped with generators. Also, when there's no electricity, this can lead to water pollution since there's no water flow, and this can endanger the entire population. Also, vaccines, those have to be stored at a proper temperature, and the lack of light affects that as well. And I want to touch upon the mental and psychological effects that constant blackouts have. They cause stress and anxiety and feeling of uncertainty about the future. My grandma is in Ukraine. She is 85 years old. And when I cannot get a hold of her because of these blackouts, I get really stressed, and this causes an anxiety even for me because I don't know what's happening. I don't know how is she doing. You know, there can be an emergency situation where she won't be able to call 911.
Well, thank you so much, Olga. I'm just gonna say, I was gonna say to mute your microphone, but thank you so much. So, just thinking about, we're not even talking about civilian casualties here. We're talking about blackouts, and we don't always think about the very far-reaching impacts of these blackouts, especially on medical programs, on hospitals. And of course, at MedGlobal, we support the healthcare infrastructure in Ukraine. So I want to move now to Dr. Michael Samatoka. You are a MedGlobal board member, and you are a trauma surgeon. You also have ties to Ukraine. You have been on the front lines many times training physicians. Just tell us about the last time that you were on the front lines, and as a trauma surgeon who has probably seen so many instances of injuries and really traumatic things in your career, how was it to be on the front lines in Ukraine?
Ben, it's my privilege to go to Ukraine and to help support the people there. As you had mentioned, my family is from Ukraine. My mother's from eastern Ukraine, Kramatorsk. My father's from a little village outside of Lviv in western Ukraine. So I've been to eastern Ukraine actually several times over the last 20 years. And just seeing the devastation and everything that has happened there is horrific. Seeing the resiliency, the determination of the people there to stay, to defend what is theirs, and to stand up for rule of law and democracy is very heartwarming. And I will say I'm very, very proud of everything that we do with MedGlobal. We're boots on the ground. We send physicians right to the front lines and nurses and therapists where we make a big impact on the training and assist the people that are there. And I will say this, multiple times on the trips I've been there, I've had people come up to me during the coffee breaks and say, we're really grateful that you're here. It means a lot to us that you're willing to stand with us and to be here. So it's heartbreaking to see the horrible devastation to so many innocent people. It's challenging to deal with the limited resources. And with MedGlobal, one of the other things that we do besides the trauma training is that we also provide medical and surgical supplies. So I'm able to talk to the trauma surgeons that are on the front lines. I find out what they really need. And so we're able to target specifically the material that they need to best serve the patients that they have. In fact, at the end of every class that we have, I give out my email and my cell phone, and I still stay in contact with many of the students that we have. If they have a difficult or challenging case, they run it by me. If it's outside of my area of expertise, I can find somebody here that will help them to try and maximize the outcomes for as many patients as we can.
Ben, you're muted.
Thank you, Douglas. So Dr. Stamatok, I want to stay with you. You talk about trauma training physicians, Ukrainian physicians, giving them the support that they need. I think for a lot of us people at home, people who don't have as much medical expertise, I think it'd be really helpful if you can just tell us what we're talking about here when we talk about the type of trauma surgery that you help physicians on the front lines do. I mean, what kind of injuries did you see? I think it's important that we realize the realities on the ground.
Sure. In the West, we have a specialty of trauma surgery, which I did 5 years of general surgery and then 2 years of fellowship, specifically focused on critical care management of surgical patients and the care of traumatized patients, blunt trauma, penetrating trauma, burns. In Ukraine and the old Soviet Union, they don't really have a profession that is specifically trauma surgeon. So the orthopedic surgeons take care of the broken bones, the anesthesiologists manage the ventilators and the ICU. There's no respiratory therapists, and there's a tremendous shortage of nursing staff. So when we go, we're basically teaching the young physicians and some older physicians who have been sent to the front line. They could be gynecologists, urologists, ear, nose, and throat doctors who are now thrown into being a frontline trauma surgeon. And so we try to go through the very basics of damage control, of how to minimize the trauma to the patient. You see a lot of extremity injuries a lot of thoracic and abdominal injuries as well. I mean, it really, unfortunately, covers the very broad spectrum of everything that you see in trauma. We've also had issues. We give a separate lecture and training on the management of white phosphorus burns, because we do know that the Russians are using chemical warfare in this battle. There's also speculation that they may be using biological warfare. And so we try to cover all the major bases, the major topics and issues that these other general surgeons, urologists, gynecologists, who are now asked to take care of patients, which in their previous practice, they really had no experience of training. And so we try to run them through a basic lecture day to hit the main topics. And then on a separate day, we have an anatomical dissection, and we go through the basic maneuvers of how to stop bleeding, how to stop spillage, and to properly resuscitate a patient.
That is just so interesting and so compelling, just to hear you give us all these insights on what it's like to be a trauma surgeon and to train actual doctors. And I think it's important to highlight for our audience that it's not that MedGlobal just parachutes in Ukraine and that we just do everything. We're here to support the local heroes, the local doctors, the local nurses, the local healthcare system. We help make it better. We don't kind of steal the spotlight from them. So I have one more question for you, Dr. Samatoka. It is my understanding that as part of your many training missions in Ukraine, you have visited certain areas in eastern Ukraine that had been under Russian occupation, and that you have seen the direct result and aftermath of the brutal Russian occupation there. Can you help us understand just what it was like for you? Anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, certainly very, very emotional. I was in Kramatorsk a week after the missile hit the pizzeria restaurant, and some Americans and young Ukrainians were killed. We laid some flowers there. I've walked through Bucha several times, had an opportunity right after Bucha was liberated to go through there and see the massive devastation, the inhumane, just horrible injuries that you just can't imagine. And just to really kind of see, and I was privileged to have a soldier with me who had been there and had been a part of the liberation. And he and I walked through the areas, and he could really give me a firsthand account of what was going on during the liberation, how that whole battle went through, and very, very, very emotional. It's hard to put into words because it's just some of the things are unfathomable, and until you really stand there and you feel it around you, you know, I can show you 1,000 pictures, I can tell you 1,000 words, but it's not the same unless you're really there and you just see and feel for yourself.
Yeah, well, very powerful. Again, I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like to be in Bucha and other such cities after the liberation. And once again, we want to highlight that, you know, we have, as an organization, MedGlobal, we have these missions with volunteers such as yourselves going to Ukraine quite often, but we also do have many programs on the ground all year long with local heroes, local healthcare workers on the front lines. And we'll talk about those programs in a minute, but I want to turn to you, Alicia Bean. So you are a registered nurse. You're based in the US, and you also provide some very important training when you go to Ukraine. So tell us about that type of training that you do, and perhaps the last time you went to Ukraine, what stood out to you?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, when Dr. Michael was speaking about Bucha, it reminded me I did also have the opportunity to go to Bucha, and I think the pictures don't do it justice. The thing that was most striking is there was this one road that you would go on where there was actually a bus stop, a plastic bus stop, where probably like 8 or 10 people could sit and wait for the bus, so they would be obviously pedestrians. And my background is primarily ER and trauma, and so I very much think through, like, you know, the direction that an injury would happen and the kind of injuries that would happen based on how things would be hit and what have you. There were bullet holes that went directly across the plastic that would be for the bus stop, that was directly at what would be my torso level, all the way through the entire awning. That was where pedestrians would be waiting for bus stop. And that in and of itself was striking, because you started to realize it wasn't random. It was very intentional, very personal, and where people would just be waiting every day for a bus. So it's striking when you walk through those places. My training, specifically what we've been focusing on over in Ukraine, is resuscitation, primarily just basic resuscitation, both for adult and pediatrics. It started out of what the Ukrainian providers told us that they wanted. They were asking for basic life support training. They learn it in medical school. Here in the US, we're required to update every 2 years. And that was something that they really wanted to have, just that basic, how do we save a life? And so we started doing just basic resuscitation, which is the just CPR, helping somebody breathe, starting the heart again. And when I was on a trip last year, I had a educator for a paramedic organization, one of the regions in Ukraine, run up to me with one of our medical directors saying, we want all of it. We want advanced adult life support. We want pediatric life support. We want to save people. And so then we started doing basically all of the resuscitation training that we could. And that's what we focus on when we go over there, is really just, if a heart isn't beating, how do we get it beating again? And we've gotten back amazing stories of lives that were saved, from kids all the way through adults since then, which has been fantastic.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for your insights and for the work that you do. So you just said that there are so many stories of children in Ukraine whose lives have been saved thanks to the resuscitation training that you provide. Well, I have heard of a story of how you came up with the idea of training ambulance drivers who were at first hesitant, not quite sure. They didn't see themselves perhaps as healthcare workers. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, so the way that we run ambulances here in the US is the people that are on the ambulance are either emergency medical technicians or they're paramedics. And so both of them can get involved in the care. The way Ukraine had it structured was that there was just a driver, the driver who their sole purpose was to get them from point A to point B as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. And so we started talking through just that team dynamic and getting more people involved. And for resuscitation, CPR and compressions are the most important thing. And so we were just talking to the directors of that paramedic crews and started bridging the idea of getting their drivers trained in basic CPR, which there was a little bit of hesitancy at first. I think there was just maybe some doubt, like, can I do that? It's like, absolutely, you can. And since then, all of their drivers in a huge region, I will mistake the numbers, but I know Olga knows them for sure. It's in the million of how many people are within that region that this ambulance service takes care of. And now all of their drivers are getting trained in basic resuscitation and have saved lives. And some of those are children, which is just amazing. And to see the pictures of the smiles on these faces of these drivers, knowing that they did everything that they could and that these people have a life now because they jumped in and were able to do it. It was great. It's really great.
Such an inspiring story that really makes you understand why all of you are so driven in all that you do. I want to ask you one more question, Alicia. So I know that everybody else on the call has personal ties to Ukraine. I know that we'll talk to Dr. Douglas Davis in a second. He says that he's Ukrainian by marriage. I know that Olga and Dr. Samatoka, have relatives and Ukrainian heritage. So that's not the case for you, but I understand that regardless, you just fell in love with Ukraine. How did that happen?
Yeah, I did. I actually, the last time I got to go there, I was fortunate enough to take the train, which I've never done, especially during the daytime. And what struck me is when I was driving in, I knew I was in Ukraine because all of a sudden, just randomly throughout the fields, you would see this shiny tops of churches that just reflect the sun perfectly. And it was just continual the whole time. And I was like, oh, we're here. We're finally here. It's, I couldn't help it. The people are just unlike anything else I've ever. I have dear friends there that I cannot wait to bring my husband to go and have dinner with them. I mean, they love. The reason I feel the reason that they love their country so much is because they love each other so well. They love their family. They love everybody around them, and that just continues to pour out into everything they do. So of course they love their country because that's where their people that they love live. I mean, you will not find a Ukrainian that will not love everybody who comes in and take care of them, and hospitality. I mean, even down to the stray dog in the neighborhood, everybody knows that animal, they love it and they take care of it. That's just being Ukrainian. You just love well.
And bear with me 1 second, Alicia, because I understand that you are going back to Ukraine pretty soon. So just, I don't know if all the dates and all the details have already been finalized, but we're talking about the past here a lot, but we have a lot of upcoming missions. Like I said, we have people who are on the ground 24/7. But since I have you here, tell us more about this
Sure.
upcoming mission.
Yeah, we have our training is coming up here in just a couple of weeks. And because of all of the attacks that have been happening this week, we're actually just trying to process through what it's going to look like not having internet, not having electricity. How are we going to be able to provide all of the training that we need without that? Because we're only there for a limited period of time, and these providers are ready to go. They want to take all of the information. And so how can we show up and be able to give them the best that we can? And so, yeah, we're going to be doing resuscitation training here just in a couple of weeks. And we have a very large volume of participants that already signed up. So I'm sure that we're gonna dive right in, and it's gonna be great.
Well, that's great to hear. And we will be asking you for updates during your trip if you have time. I know you just mentioned no internet, so perhaps when you come back, but we'll be, of course, promoting all the great work that the team will be doing there. So let's turn to you, Dr. Douglas Davis. As I said a second ago, you often describe yourself as Ukrainian by marriage. I know that.
I need a qualification here.
I know you've been involved from the beginning, from the day of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine with relief efforts in America. You have a lot of connections with many NGOs, nonprofits. And yet you have told me that you're very impressed by MedGlobal and that we kind of stand apart. So why is that the case? Just give us your impressions on MedGlobal as a volunteer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben, for having us all here together. And this team that you've got here, and unfortunately we couldn't get all of the team here, like Alexandra, Chandra, so many others, Zahar himself. It's just been, I mean, an incredible team. These are some of the people that have become closest friends and most trusted confidants in the world. And I commonly describe sort of all of this as just a string of serendipities, that how we all came together and how all of the work really has grown and evolved over the 2.5 years of the war. What brought me actually to MedGlobal was my work with Olya. Olya and I are part of the Ukrainian Medical Association North America. I had been a colleague of the past president, Leo Walansky, who's a radiologist at the University of Connecticut at the University of Connecticut when I was at Yale, and we'd known each other for years. And he linked me up with Olya and the Umana crew in Chicago, and we had worked from the outset to mobilize as much material aid as we possibly could. At the time of the first MedGlobal conference that I attended with Olya, we had sent, I think already at that point in time, about 300 tons of medical aid and supplies, mostly by air flight, but transitioning to cargo ship containers, and we were, and Olya had already been providing material and networking support to MedGlobal and Zahir for their earliest missions. And so I came to the first MedGlobal conference, and I brought, my wife wasn't able to attend, but my sister-in-law was. And she sat actually right next to Alicia and another nurse that had been on literally the first medical mission that MedGlobal had done, where they, like so many people in this organization do, they run towards fires, you know, they run into the fray. And we're sitting there with my sister-in-law watching the videos and the stories, and all of the people on the stage. Tanya Bucerka was there, Conrad Fisher, Zahir, and my sister-in-law's trembling, and tears are streaming down her face, because the people that were on the stage, they're in the video that was recorded in like the first 2 to 3 weeks of the war, and they're in hospital number 8, St. Luke's Hospital in Lviv, which is now the National Burn Center. It was headed at that time by Alexander Duneyev. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law both worked there. They were at Chernobyl's Children's Hospital, as it's colloquially known, because it was a hospital that was founded for specialized cancer care in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster. It's now Western Specialized Children's Hospital. There's a basement pool, and Zahir and them are sitting in, because that's where you had to go when the missile raid and sirens are. And so we're watching these videos. My sister-in-law is just, you know, emotionally just overwhelmed by it, and that's where I first, you know, got to meet Zahir in person, Michael, Chandra, and everyone. And it just over time evolved that Michael was going on medical surgical missions and carrying all this equipment. I was like, Michael, we have warehouses in Lviv. why are you carrying all this stuff? Our good friend Mykola Pustovchenko, he'll hook you up. And so one of our first trips with me and Michael together, Michael was, you know, like Michael always is, you know, running to the real fray, to the front lines. You know, I think even on that trip he was east of Kramatorsk, which was under really heavy assault at the time he was there. But Michael linked up and was taking supplies that we had already, you know, shipped over, so he didn't have to bring them himself. And we've done that to support a lot of his work. But from there, it's progressed and evolved even, I mean, much further. I mean, we can go through and talk about the specific programs we do. You know, Alexandra can talk about the mobile medical clinics, the POCUS training, the BLS, Michael's trauma training. But to me, the thing that sets MedGlobal apart is it's really, I mean, I think Zahir epitomizes this, is it's the multinational, very diverse organization that has such an incredible footprint across the world, and brings to the situation in Ukraine a knowledge and expertise and an inclination towards coalition building that's really been profound, and in terms of maximizing our impact factor. I mean, the reality is that the NGO work from the United States that's been supporting Ukraine, really the core backbone of that has been a lot of the diaspora organizations, Razom, Nova Ukraine, Umana, and others. And they are a core backbone. Zahir has been involved with a lot of those groups from the get-go in terms of lending his experience and expertise, having done this for, you know, over a decade, and having seen some of very much parallel what you could call geopolitical influences over how this war has evolved. I mean, Zahir, the war in Zahir's home country, Syria, was.
If I may just interrupt just for a second, I just want to clarify that when you say Zahir, you are referring, of course, to Dr. Zahir Sarlou,
yes, absolutely,
MedGlobal's president and co-founder. Just for people who don't know him personally, Thank you.
There's only one Zapper.
There's only one here, right? If he's watching, I'm sure he'll enjoy this segment right here. If you don't mind, Dr. Davis, I want to try and go back to Olia. Hopefully, with an improved microphone, although it wasn't too bad, because at the end of the day, Olia, you do have some really great insights as our Ukraine programs coordinator on all the day-to-day work that we do in Ukraine, not just the training missions with volunteers, but all the programs that are operated by local workers. So why don't we start with the mobile clinic that we have on the front line? Just tell us about that program and why it is such a life-saving service that MedGlobal offers.
Sure. I apologize for my microphone. I hope you all can hear me a little bit better now. So mobile clinics, it's actually one of the projects that I personally am very passionate about because we can see the direct effects. It's on the ground. We can talk to our physicians who are seeing patients every day. So a little bit about mobile clinics. They operate in Kharkiv region, in the areas that were liberated from Russian occupation. So villages that were under occupation for a while. We see the destruction. We see the lack of healthcare support. Those people are not able to get basic medications, get a physician visit. So that's where mobile clinic comes in. We have a family doctor on board. We have a nurse. We have a social worker and a psychologist. And what's interesting, Ben, this is something you and I talked about. In Ukraine, mental health has been kind of taboo for years. Nobody really, there's no mental health issues. You don't need to talk to anybody. You have to deal with it by yourself. But that's not the case now. And even with our mobile clinics, we're seeing how many patients our psychologists are seeing per month. Before, just a few months ago, in our mobile clinic would see about 300 to 350 patients per month, where now we're seeing anywhere between 500 to 600 patients a month. And a lot of those visits are with a psychologist. Our primary care is also there. We do basic lab work. We dispense basic medication. Our social worker allows these patients, helps these patients, to get to a hospital if they need more specialized care. We have to think about it. We have to think about this, that these villages are kind of isolated. The roads are destroyed. There are many houses that have been shelled and bombed. There are many elderly people that are left behind without nobody. So our mobile clinic comes in there and also does house visits where we take care of the elderly, of bedbound patients, and we make sure to come back a month later and to keep providing them the care that they need. Can't hear you.
Thank you, Olia, for more insights and details into just one of the programs that we run in Ukraine. And I just want to emphasize for our listeners the importance of that mobile clinic, of course, which is in Kharkiv right now, but I understand that it was in different cities previously, just depending on the needs of the population. And I mean, we're talking about a city that is being relentlessly bombarded, and where the remaining civilians are not just at risk of being targeted on a daily basis, but of course don't have easy access to healthcare, to hospitals. And by being mobile, MedGlobal on the ground there is able to just be very nimble and to access people where they are. And that's why it's so important to have those nimble services. And you also mentioned mental health. And so I know one of our newest programs in Ukraine is a mental health retreat for mothers and children, Ukrainian mothers and children who unfortunately have a family member either in Russian captivity or I believe perhaps who has been a casualty of this war. We can, of course, understand why these mothers and children would need mental health help. But how does these retreats work? I know there was one recently. Just tell us about it, Olia.
Yeah, that's correct. These retreats, this was a pilot program that we started earlier this year in May. That was our first camp that we had. These camps are in outskirts of Kyiv, in a beautiful park with nature. And we bring in mothers and their kids from either the occupied territories that are really close to the front line. And these families either have somebody in Russian captivity or they lost a father, brother. I apologize for the side noise. And we healed them through arts and therapy, through cooking classes. You know, at first we weren't sure how this was going to be taken by mothers and children because they have gone through a lot. They've experienced a lot of pain, suffering, and loss. But the camps have been very successful. We just finished our second camp a few weeks ago where we had 20 adults and 12 children. And you know how I know when a program is successful or the camp is successful is when we're done for the day and we let everybody go to their rooms and take the rest of the day off. And our trainers say, this is not part of the program, but if you guys want to, we're going to meet by the fire and just have a chit chat, just hang out. This is not mandatory. And everybody shows up. And mothers and children and their laughs and tears. And to me, it just, when I hear these stories, it's really close to my heart that we can help, that MedGlobal is on the ground and we can help families and mothers and children, because really children in Ukraine, the childhood that they have, they can distinguish between different missiles and drones. And that's the childhood that they've been having for the past 2 years, not going to school, or even if they go to school, their class is disrupted by air sirens. They have to go to bomb shelter. And it really affects the well-being and the emotional state of these children. And if we do not provide the help and work with them now, this is going to have really negative long-term effects.
Really well said, and such important work you're describing, Olia. And if I can just hone in on really trying to understand how these mental health retreats work, because we can hear the emotions in your voice and we understand I just want to repeat it for our listeners who may just be joining. We're talking about a MedGlobal program that offers mental health camps or retreats, I believe for a weekend or longer, to Ukrainian mothers, Ukrainian children who have a family member, often a father in Russian captivity, or perhaps a family member who has been killed in this war. So when it comes to offering these mental health services, therapy, because these are camps, we're talking about all day long programs. What is the program like? Just help us understand the kind of therapy that we offer.
So this is a full weekend program. It's a long weekend, about 3 days, where we provide a place where they can live. They stay in this resort kind of area outside of Kyiv. The day starts with group sessions where they get to work with different psychologists and specialists. We separate mothers and we separate children. We work with moms and children. We then have group sessions between mothers and their children. Then we have separate sessions where we work with them through art and then through cooking classes. On the last camp, they baked bread. This last camp, they made Ukrainian borscht. And then our psychologists also have different types of programs where they teach different mechanisms how to deal with the stress and the emotions that they're experiencing.
Got it. Important, of course, to provide good food on the ground. I like that you brought that up. So thank you, Olya, for describing all our programs that are run once again by people in Ukraine. Our country representative in Kyiv, Alexandra, was supposed to give us her firsthand insights, but I just want to say it once more for people just joining us, that there are many power outages across Ukraine right now. This is the aftermath of some massive aerial attacks from Russia on Ukraine that happened just a couple days ago. And unfortunately, she couldn't join us. But she, of course, works really hard to make all those programs happen on the ground. I'm joined here with our volunteers, board members, and full staff members who are based in the US. And do all they can to help from the US. So I want to go back to you, Dr. Samatoka. We talked about what it was like to witness cities that had just been liberated by Ukraine, that had suffered Russian occupation in your previous missions. But I understand that you are also going to Ukraine soon for another surgery training. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we actually just had a Zoom meeting last night. We're organizing a mission for December, and certainly at this time don't want to discuss the location, but we'll be doing our training as usual. And I'm actually, one thing that I think, Ben, we should mention, my parents are from Ukraine, Olya's family is from Ukraine, Doug is married to a Ukrainian, but people like Alicia, and others, three of the trauma surgeons will be going with me, have absolutely no relatives, probably couldn't find Ukraine on a map 5 years ago, but they've stepped up and volunteered to go. And again, I just want to emphasize how important that is to the morale of the Ukrainian people. And it really speaks highly to the decency of the American population. There's so many people. I went to a conference in North Carolina on trauma, and three of the speakers were Americans who had organized mission trips to Ukraine, and they were talking about their experiences. So it just goes a long way when you see people like Alicia and others, like the three surgeons who will be going with me on this next mission in December. We are planning on it being a very successful mission. We're going to be bringing a lot of surgical supplies that we know are unfortunately desperately needed there right now. And one other thing that I would like to bring up that we really haven't discussed yet is MedGlobal goes out of its way to be boots on the ground in the front lines, but we also go a long way toward partnering and collaborating with other NGOs. It's not a competition. We're here, we're all on the same team. We want to help the people who need the help, and that holds true whether it's Ukraine or Syria or Gaza or anywhere in the world. That's the mission of MedGlobal, is to help those who need help and otherwise will not get it. So some of our partnerships have really helped blossom some of these programs that we've talked about, and I don't know that all these programs would be as good as they are had it not been for some of the collaboration that we've had with other groups. So I think that that's very important. I am excited about our program in December. I'm going to meet some old friends. I'm going to be seeing some places that I haven't been to in a couple months. And just looking forward to a very positive experience.
If I can just dovetail with what Mike's saying, because Mike and I are actually planning to be back in October with our good friend and MedGlobal supporter, Dr. Ram Stevens, who's doing some incredible work in terms of the POCUS training for MedGlobal, and also getting higher standards of care, particularly for things like tourniquet syndrome and such. but I want to go back to like one of Mike's stories, because I don't think Mike is way too humble of a guy. I actually had to go and update Michael's LinkedIn page for him because he wouldn't do it. And I was like, we need to brag more about Michael Samatoka, because Michael Samatoka mentioned earlier that he was in Zaporizhia, or I'm sorry, in Kramatorsk, his mother's hometown, shortly after that pizzeria bombing. What he didn't mention was that, well, interestingly, literally a year, almost to the day before that, my wife's 25-year-old cousin was killed in Kramatorsk by a similar missile strike. Mike's there a year later, this past summer, and I had gotten a call through one of the NGOs that I worked with for assistance with some of the Americans that were injured in that strike. And they were asking me, and I was in the United States at the time, and I was like, well, I'm not there, but I know who to call. I called Michael Samatoka, and Michael Samatoka helped facilitate the evacuation and the proper care for those Americans that ended up in Feofania in Kiev. And then Michael went on from there to the front lines in Bakhmut. And funny and interesting enough, it's a small world. The person he was with, he didn't realize it at the time. He's sending me pictures, and I was like, wait a minute, you're with Mariana Bilic. Mike's like, how did you know? I was like, we know Mariana for years, but it's this incredible network that we have, and we all, this team just works really well together. And Mike went, and when he went to Bakhmut after being at that pizzeria, he's not just going and providing, let's have a trauma surgery lecture. He's with some of the most trauma experienced surgeons probably in the world, like Dr. Dmitro Beshely, Roman Sobko, Andrei Sobko, in Bakhmut, seeing it front hand. He described white phosphorus injuries. Dr. Sobko, who Michael went to and was with in Bakhmut, has shown me the videos of them in the operating room pulling what they thought was foreign bodies out during surgery. Turns out it was a piece of white phosphorus that starts incinerating in the operating room. I mean, these guys are dealing with just unbelievable circumstances. And you've got Michael Samatoka, people like Hudson Berry, Dr. Ram Stevens, Chandra Hassan, with this team that are going there, and it's not just valuable. It's not just valuable what they're bringing to them. It's so invaluable what they're bringing back. So we really know what's going on the front lines. We really know what the needs. Dr. Ram Stevens is going to be presenting about tourniquet syndrome and how there's all this unnecessary limb amputations going on about that. We wouldn't know about this if we didn't have the connections, in the most hard-hit conflict-borne areas. So Michael doesn't brag enough about himself.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for being Dr. Stamatovka's spokesperson, or to brag on his behalf. And I think that was really enlightening. And I think that I'm obliged to follow up now with you once again, Michael. Just one thing you said that I think is going to resonate with many people who don't have personal ties to Ukraine, but feel a connection with the country and perhaps have participated in some type of relief effort or protest over the past 2.5 years, even longer. So you mentioned that when we see, the American public or American volunteers or anybody in the US doing what they can to help the people of Ukraine, that it is such a morale boost to Ukrainians on the ground. So you go to all these war-torn areas in Ukraine, and you are Ukrainian American, but what do they tell you about these needs that perhaps they feel they have to make sure that a powerful ally such as the US has their back?
Yeah, it's critical. Russia is so much larger than Ukraine, and Ukraine can win this war. They need to win this war, but they can't win this war without the help of the people that you see here. And Doug is one of my biggest cheerleaders. Thank you. But he's also doesn't speak about all the things that he has done. It's people like that, like Hudson Berry, like Judah Sokolsky, like Chandra Hassan, that have really stepped up to Alicia, have stepped up to the plate and done so much. And for those people in America that don't want to go to the front line of a red zone, that's okay. Support us morally. Stand up, speak out. It's when good people go silent that dictators rule. They rule by being a bully and by intimidating people not to do the right thing. And we can't let that happen. If you look back at the history in Chechnya, horrible, horrible devastation from the Russians. In Georgia, terrible devastation. In Syria, and now in Ukraine. This isn't going to stop unless we stand up and make it stop. And unfortunately, the world really did not step up to the plate and do what we needed to do back when this was in Chechnya or Georgia or Syria. And now we're seeing a horrific, brutal war in Ukraine. And those young men and women who are fighting and dying for their lives, for their country, they're also fighting for us. They're fighting for the same principles of democracy, of rule of law, of respect for other cultures. I went to an interfaith meeting in Kiev where representatives of all the different churches, Jewish, Muslim, faith, all were together. I sat next to the head mufti for Crimea, for the Crimean Tatars, and we started talking. And he spoke fluent, flawless, grammatically correct Ukrainian. And he looked at me and says, "I'm proud to be a Tatar. I'm proud to be a Ukrainian." Because under Ukrainian government and Ukrainian rule, they were given the opportunity to grow their culture, to speak their language, to have their own mosques. I had the privilege of meeting one of the leaders of the Jewish diaspora in Kiev. And he talked about how he works and connects with MedGlobal and other NGOs and trying to do what he can for Ukraine. It's going to take a village. It's going to take an enormous amount of decent people standing up, doing the right thing to bring this to an end and to stop this suffering.
And I want to follow up on this by quickly reminding our viewers and listeners that if they haven't noticed, one simple thing they can do is just to text the number that is currently flickering in the ticker at the bottom of the screen, just to find out more about MedGlobal and donation possibilities to help our programs, to help our heroes. I want to turn to you now. Actually, one more question for you, Dr. Samatoka. You also mentioned earlier that when you go on these training missions, aside from all the hard work you do as a surgeon, there is also a material aspect to it, and that there is this very hard work to bring in surgical supplies that are very much needed, as you said, on the front lines and elsewhere. Just tell us more details. How is this? What kind of supplies are we talking about? What is needed the most at the moment?
Yeah. So unfortunately, just as the Russians have targeted the infrastructure, the power grid for Ukraine, they've also targeted hospitals. They've targeted healthcare providers because it's very demoralizing to see a hospital be blown up. And so with our Ukrainian groups, we have partnered with a group called MedWish, which was founded in Cleveland, Ohio, by the son of a prominent surgeon. And basically they collect expired or no longer used medical surgical supplies in a warehouse, and then at a fraction of the cost, donate it to various charities that go all over the world. And they're really doing an outstanding job of helping the Ukrainian diaspora to get the supplies that we need. Every hospital that I've ever worked at, I've reached out to people that I worked with before, and it's amazing how many people gather medical and surgical supplies. They give me a call, we pick it up, and we pack it up, and then either through Doug and Oya, we send it through Umana or MedGlobal, or sometimes we do try to carry it on our own. And we figured out the system. We figured out the proper paperwork of how to get things across the border officially. And we put it in the hands of the people that we know, that we work with, that we trust, so that we know that there's no black marketing, that these are supplies that are really going directly into the hands to be used by the people who are there risking their lives, trying to save the Ukrainian people. So I think our system is something to be very proud of, what MedGlobal has done. And again, it's that partnership with MedWish, with Umana, with
Yes.
other organizations, that we are able to grow and really provide a great service for the people of Ukraine.
Yeah. We actually have 3 different warehouses in Lviv region that are 3 different organizations. Umana, Be an Angel, Help Heroes of Ukraine. It's and they've all been helpful and facilitatory there. It's really been incredible, and it's been an evolving process. When we started, we had no logistical precision. We could get volume over, but we had no logistical precision. Now we can get things directly in the hands of specific surgeons, specific location, in a very timely manner. So, and people like Michael have been a huge part of like helping us increase that logistical precision.
And every time we go to Ukraine, and we've made quite a few trips, the surgeons, doctors, and hospitals that we visit, they always say, because of organization like yours, like MedGlobal, and all the partners that we have, we are able to do the work that we do. We have the supplies that we need to take care of patients. And that really says a lot about, the work that we do and the value that we bring to Ukrainian hospitals. And I also want to mention, we talked a lot about programs, and MedGlobal is very special in the way our programs run, because we do not just go to Ukraine, do a few trainings, and leave. We are different in the way that we help Ukrainian healthcare. We work with Ministry of Health to develop the standards, the guidelines for standards of care, which then help us build those resilient communities. And we're going to leave behind the knowledge and the expertise. And that is very important, and that is the huge impact that we're able to leave in Ukraine. And I also wanted to mention that recently, just a few days ago, we were recognized, MedGlobal was recognized by Lashko, Ukrainian Minister of Health. We received a recognition for the impact and the work that we do on the ground in Ukraine.
Thank you, Olia.
Quickly, to go back to what Michael was talking about, the interfaith, this speaks to even the broader vision that MedGlobal has brought, and a lot of the coalition building. Dr. Solul helped to really spearhead this in terms of wanting to bring together people from diverse backgrounds. So we had medical delegates, interfaith delegates across all faiths, going to Ukraine, meeting and sitting with people across both civil society, government, healthcare structures, going to the sites of the mass atrocities, Boryadanka, Bucha, visiting with the multi-faith leaders in those locations, like the pastors of the Protestant church who housed 300 people as Ukrainians were being slaughtered in the streets of Bucha. We were there with Reverend Gregory Livingston, one of our really great friends, who I most probably blown away experience I've probably ever experienced was to be at the National University with probably 300 people in the room. And Gregory Livingston has us all stand up and hold hands and sway, singing "We Shall Overcome." I think for the Ukrainians, it was mind blowing, but it was also just this incredibly bridging and friendship building and understanding building operation. And that's really what's special about everything MedGlobal does and this team we have here.
So let me just quickly take it back. You just said what's special about MedGlobal, and I know all of you are so passionate. You could talk about MedGlobal in Ukraine for hours, but we just reached a 1 hour point, and I just want to wrap things up. I also want to remind our viewers about the upcoming MedGlobal conference, a yearly big show, a conference and a gala that's happening this year on October 4th and October 5th. And you mentioned earlier, Dr. Davis, that being at the conference and learning about MedGlobal is what convinced you to play a bigger role at MedGlobal. So for everyone listening to us, anyone watching us, please just Google MedGlobal Conference and then you will find more information. It is just a great place to get to know about our programs, maybe volunteering opportunities. But I'm going to say that perhaps I want to give everybody maybe 30 more seconds to wrap things up, just to leave on an important and high note. So why don't we start with you, Alicia, and then we can go with somebody else. Just tell us quickly, at the end of the day, what it is that compels you to do this life-saving work.
I think at the end of the day, it's as simple as what has been said to me multiple times and what Dr. Michael was talking about earlier. Too many Ukrainians are asking me and everybody back home not to forget. And so I'm just committed to that in and of itself.
What about you, Dr. Davis?
So I'm on mute. Well, I mean, it goes back to what Michael was talking about. Ukraine's the tip of the spear for freedom and democracy for the whole free world. They really are, and and people like Dr. Salul really understand that, because before Russia was laying waste to cities like Mariupol, it was doing it to places like Aleppo, Syria, and there's direct, connections between all of that. So to the degree that we can be a part of helping from an advocacy standpoint, from an understanding standpoint, and then the actual real on the ground assistance we can provide, I think it's enormous. And we want to build resilient systems. We want Ukraine to not only win this war and be free, we want them to have a functioning civil society afterwards. And I just take a real quick moment. If anybody's not watching, the Ukrainian Paralympics or the Paris Paralympics starts in one day. And one of our good friends, for the Michael and Olya and I have worked with Valery Suskevich of the Ukrainian Paralympic Sports Committee will be there. We want to cheer them on, because one of the things we really support is there's going to be an enormous amputee and rehab issue. And so we need to understand the problems and figure how we can best plug in to support the Ukrainians and to build coalitions that will make a real difference. So thank you.
Thank you. What about you, Olya?
Well, for me, it's few things. I was born in Ukraine. I spent all of my childhood in Ukraine, so it's my homeland, and I'm always going to be drawn to it. And it's as simple as humanity. Helping human beings elevate their suffering, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, Syria, any other country. It's just not fair in today's day for people to be suffering like this.
Yeah. And then final word for you, Dr. Samatoka, what compels you to risk your life to save lives?
Because it's the morally right thing to do. And I'd like to take the last 30 seconds of this to plead for those people who are watching. We will go and we will do what's right. We will do everything we can to help, but we really do need financial support. None of these programs happen unless we have the finances to do it. And really, for everybody who's watching this show right now, find a place in your heart to donate. So that we can continue to do these programs and expand to do more.
Thank you very much to all of you. I don't want to add too much to what you just said, because it was so beautifully said. We will have more shows just like this one about all the different countries and regions in which MedGlobal operates. We'll have another one on Ukraine, or perhaps we don't, if there is no need for another one, if this brutal war can end. But again, thank you very much to all of you, to all our viewers, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.